Since Texas Independence Day was recently on March 2nd and the Alamo ended on March 6th, I figured I'd cover the episode involving Texas history. So let's talk about the episode about the Alamo, the multi-day siege, not the beer company.
I want to open the play with a speech from a new character, the Ghost of the Alamo. What do you think?
Ghost?
Hey folks, welcome to Squirrel Tactics. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you haven't already. Check out our Patreon and merch store, and yeah, let's just do this thing. How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Alamo. The title is a reference to Stanley Kubrick's 1964 classic Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb.
Gentlemen, you can't fight in here. This is the war room.
A large part of what the episode deals with is what's known as historical negationism, and how it conflicts with the traditionally taught version of history, as well as a B-plot that I'm not a huge fan of, but we'll get to that. The episode starts off with Bobby's history class moving into Texas history.
Yes, Texas history! I can't wait to tell my dad there'll be steaks for dinner tonight.
I find this odd because Texas history is typically a full year class rather than just a section of a class. In my case, 7th grade history was Texas history, 6th grade was world, 8th grade was US. And based off my research, it seems that this is the typical case with schools in Texas. But whatever, the class gets new textbooks, thankfully, since the old ones are literally falling apart. And what's interesting here is that the teacher is unnamed and only appears in this scene, yet she is voiced by Elizabeth Perkins.
Okay, now remember, these represent Texas and a lot of money, so keep your naked ladies and your words to rock songs out of the margins.
You doodle in these books, and I am going to doodle you an F.
I don't think I need to go on a diatribe about how mismanaged and underfunded the educational system is. Pretty sure we're all in agreement on that one. The fear of consequences for defacing a new textbook firmly in place, Bobby heads home to inform Hank that they had moved into Texas history territory, much to Hank's delight.
Fire up the grill, Dad. We just started Texas history.
Texas history? Son, today you are officially a Texan. Congratulations.
And Bobby proceeds to look for something to cover his new textbook with, deciding on aluminum foil, which is a choice, I suppose, but one I've never personally seen. Based off my experience, again, mine is not the end-all be-all experience, but the way we did it was that you were issued a textbook and a paper cover to put on it. These paper covers were donated to the schools, and the ones I remember were typically provided by either Dr. Pepper or Six Flags. And yeah, both of those make sense because it's Texas. Literally the first thing you did when you got your textbook was to put the cover on by folding it in place, which is surprising to me that they would send their pupils off with these brand new non-covered books when they're worried about them not getting messed up. When Hank suggests using a bag instead, well, Bobby makes another interesting choice.
And your mother only went here to buy athletic socks. They make a very good athletic sock.
Yeah, that's a Victoria's Secret bag, and I get that Hank is trying to lie here, but let's not forget the size of Peggy's feet.
I'm looking for something in a woman's size 16 bowling shoe that says 8 on the back.
No, I think you're looking for a size 16 and a half that says 8 on the back.
16 and a half? No. No. I have been a size 16 since I was just a little girl.
Oh, it's actually quite common for a woman's feet to keep growing as she gets older.
They're getting bigger?
She wears a 16 and a half, a size that Victoria's Secret does not carry. So we know she was not there looking for socks. Plus, why wouldn't Hank just say it was Luann's?
Oh, God! Luann, I thought you went home.
Nah, Uncle Hank. Mom and Daddy are still fighting.
Well, you're welcome to stay, but for God's sakes, girl, lock the door. I've got a minor son living in this house.
Anywho, Peggy, meanwhile, is helping Nancy open her fan mail, listening as Nancy bemoans her job and station in life.
Why is God punishing me? Why, Shug?
But what matters here is that in with her declarations of ruined weddings is a flat Stanley.
Or you could just call me Stanley. Not make fun of my body.
Which Nancy is none too happy about, though she doesn't know exactly what it is, but hates that she's meant to spend her own time to help kids learn geography.
Teachers have their students send them out to faraway places. Then you take pictures of him, send it back, and the kids learn about geography.
What did these people want from me?
Peggy declares that since Nancy's so busy, she'll take care of Flat Stanley, which is a terrible idea, but yeah, we're gonna get to that. Also, I've covered the Flat Stanley B-plot before, but I didn't go much into who and or what Flat Stanley is and or was. Flat Stanley was the star of a book series by Jeff Brown that began in 1964. The idea being that Flat Stanley was a regular kid who was crushed completely flat by a bulletin board while sleeping. The idea of using him to teach geography came from third grade teacher Dale Hubert in 1995 when he created the Flat Stanley Project. Bobby's first Texas history test is coming up, and he of course forgets his book at the school.
Can't use Joseph's!
Luckily, Hank still has his old textbook.
Didn't they make you turn it in?
The student with the highest grade got to keep their textbook. Back then, they knew how to motivate a teenager.
By the way, this is the quintessential white suburban bookshelf of the late 90s, early 2000s. Pretty sure one of the missing books there is A Dinner of Onions.
I got half a mind to go to Nova Scotia and kick that Benedict's ass, honey.
Now, personally, I've only ever kept one textbook from school before college, and that was my high school Latin book. And that only happened because the teacher was an alcoholic that didn't care if you turned your book in or not. Yeah, instead of collecting our books, he just kind of sat at his desk drinking from the same chocolate milk carton he brought to class every day. Anywho, they have themselves a study session while Peggy and Luann are out finding areas to take Flat Stanley pictures, settling on the loading dock at Megalomart due to its high traffic of poultry. I mean, it's a reason, maybe not a good one, but it's a reason nonetheless.
It is like the Ellis Island for dead chickens.
Luann asks why exactly it is that Flat Stanley is, well, flat.
Or you could just call me Stanley, not make fun of my body.
And being an educator well-versed in the ins and outs of Flat Stanley, Peggy of course knows that it's explained in the first book that Stanley was flattened by a fallen bulletin board while he was sleeping in bed, so she explains that.
Why is Flat Stanley flat? Because he wasn't careful and got tragically and painfully flattened.
Except no, she doesn't explain it, because of course she doesn't explain it. She barely knows who or what Flat Stanley is. And rather than be knowledgeable on the subject or even possibly look into his origins, no. Peggy decides that it would make more sense to traumatize a class full of children and Luann along the way.
Flat Stanley can do more than just teach geography. He can save lives. Put him under that semi. I will call this one, Look Both Ways Before Dying.
Bobby gets his test results back and sees that he failed, but the reason for his failure was that he was taught out of Hank's textbook and not his. And there are apparently some major differences between the two. Plus, I gotta say, some of the stuff they focus on for Bobby to learn doesn't make any sense.
The planting of the first poinsettias?
Yeah, poinsettias have basically nothing to do with Texas. They were first brought to the U.S. from Mexico by the first U.S. minister to Mexico, Joel Poinsett, but he sent them to South Carolina, not Texas. So I don't really get the relevance there other than they're, big during Christmas here. And what's covered in the book doesn't make a whole lot of sense either.
The introduction of the accordion? A whole chapter on Selena? Where are the chapters about the Alamo?
I've mentioned in previous videos about how German immigrants brought many things to Texas with them. Two of them being the accordion and polka, which is where Tejano music comes from.
Viva la Revolucion! Octavio.
Buenos días, amigos. Presentamos el rey de la polka, Flaco Jiménez, con de bolón ping-pong.
So I kind of get a cultural importance, and don't get me wrong, Selena was amazingly talented and taken way too soon. But I don't think a whole chapter in a Texas history textbook is necessarily warranted, which I do understand is the point, but we're going to discuss that more here in a minute.
Wait, I think I saw something else about it. Oh. That's the first Taco Bell.
Not sure why the first Taco Bell would be in a Texas history book, considering the first Taco Bell is in California. And it took them like 5 years before they finally expanded into Texas. It would have made more sense to go with the first Taco Bueno, which was founded in Abilene.
Things looked pretty bleak when we lost Joe Jack because of, well, we all know what happened at the Taco Bueno.
Though apparently eventually Taco Bell will sadly reign Nacho Supreme.
You do not realize that Taco Bell was the only restaurant to survive the franchise wars.
So?
Now all restaurants are Taco Bell.
No way.
Hank takes his irritation and disappointment to Principal Moss, and that goes about as well as anyone would expect considering Principal Moss and his history of being a champion of education above all else.
You know, the Carl Moss I knew wouldn't
Give
have...
it a rest, Hank. All parents care about these days is zero-tolerance drug policies and literacy. Why can't Johnny read? Why can't Johnny read? God, that gets old.
But Carl, shop is the foundation of all learning. And I tell you what, a youngster with a tool in both hands has no hands left to do drugs.
They'll just put the tools down if they want to do the drugs bad enough.
Yeah, Principal Moss just throws up his hands and recommends that Hank go talk to the school board, which should come as no surprise.
You familiar with a little thing called the Serenity Prayer, Hank? Because this is one of those things I can't change.
But where's the Texas history we grew up with, Carl? You wore a coonskin cap from the 8th through the 11th grade.
I also love Hank bringing up Davy Crockett's raccoon skin hat, which Hank and Carl know mostly from this.
Davy Crockett, king of the wild frontier.
But it makes a lot of us think of this.
Sorry about this, Mr. Crockett. Why am I wearing the hat?
Peggy, meanwhile, is continuing her crusade to save the children.
Won't somebody please think of the children?
This time from firearms, because apparently people don't know that bullets cause harm. Or, well, I don't know exactly what she's trying to prove here other than how many shots old Flat Stanley could take before he's literally blown apart, which I guess could help children somehow. I'm trying here, I'm really trying. But Peggy ain't making this easy.
Fire! Until he learns his lesson.
That poor bastard. Moving on, Hank has very little success when dealing with the school board, who admit that certain things, like the Texas Revolution, were purposely omitted due to outside pressure.
But the Texas Revolution, how could you not include that?
It was making a lot of people uncomfortable.
Who?
Lawyers, mostly.
Yeah, that's what history does. It makes you uncomfortable, because the truth is there are no clean hands in history. Go ahead and imagine the worst possible thing that one human could do to another, and it's probably been done most likely multiple times. History is like a dark continent where the more you explore, the less faith you tend to have in humanity. But history is also necessary, as Michael Crichton put it. If you don't know history, then you don't know anything. You are a leaf that doesn't know it is part of a tree. Hank does seem to come across someone who appears to be a kindred spirit.
Yeah, these kids aren't learning anything.
Bruce Tuttle, voiced by David Herman, of course, who agrees that the kids aren't being taught the proper version of history. And over dinner at Luli's, the show's stand-in for Luby's, known for their Luann platter.
Here's a little trick I use to remember my name. Okay, I think of a man named Lou, and then a woman named Anne. They meet in a kingdom in the forest,
where they come up with the idea of running their own reenactment of the Alamo.
I bet Buck Strickland will foot the bill. He was talking about sponsoring a soccer team, but this is a much better use of the money.
They decide that Bruce will write and direct it. Apparently he writes a flyer for a local feed store that Hank's a fan of, with Bobby coming on board as a way to get extra credit to make up for his failed test and to keep him out of possibly going to summer school.
Mr. Tuttle said I can play James Butler Bonham, Alamo Messenger.
Fun fact, James Butler Bonham was a real person. He was actually 29, by the way, but he was the messenger sent to Gonzales to try and get reinforcements. And he actually returned with a letter calling for the Alamo defenders to hold on and that help would be coming. Contrary to what they show here, where Bobby says there is no help coming.
Sir, Santa Anna's men outnumber us by the thousands. General Houston sends his regards, but no additional troops.
By the way, the troops from Gonzales that didn't come and help were mostly captured later on and were part of the massacre at Goliad, where over 400 Texian POWs were executed under the direct order of Santa Anna. Anywho, the project is coming along and the guys head up to the site. We see that apparently Buck did agree to sponsor the event, and we also learn more about Bruce. He's not just a flyer writer. Apparently he has a knack for finding actors and has an interesting relationship with his children's babysitter Charla, who was voiced by Brittany Murphy. Now, I'm not sure if he's married or not. He never mentions a wife, but he's definitely hooking up with the babysitter either way.
You know, I joke about running off to Hollywood and abandoning my kids, but I don't think I could really go through with it. I've got
got work to do.
The guys get the set built and put in place, proud of themselves for their work, which is immediately followed by Peggy traumatizing Luann by recreating Trip Larson's death.
Oh my god. I can suddenly think clearly. The voices have left my head. What am I doing in a pig costume? Uh-oh.
In the exact same building, on the exact same line, probably the exact same spike. I know I've harped on this before, hell, I ranked it as one of the worst things that Peggy's done in the entire series, but it's just really messed up when you think about it.
Do we really have to worry about children wandering into pork plants and climbing onto the kill line?
Not if I do my job.
We then get to see a partial run-through of Bruce's version of the Alamo, which begins with a new character known as the Ghost of the Alamo, who starts everything off with a warning that makes Hank rather worried, and yeah, I can totally understand why.
Where are our heroes? Don't look for them here. The world's not so simple. The world's not so clear.
I don't get it.
So what Bruce is doing here is often mislabeled as revisionist history when it is in fact historical negationism, wherein history is rewritten directly against known historical evidence to intentionally push an agenda. We see some of this with Davy Crockett.
Davy Crockett, king of the wild frontier.
Yeah, that guy, folk hero, frontiersman, and politician who fought both against and alongside native tribes and actually lost his political career because he argued against Andrew Jackson's Indian Removal Act, being the only representative from Tennessee to vote against it.
I would have faced up to my demons instead of using dead Indians and Mexicans as stepping stones back to the Senate.
Crockett would also end up dying at the Alamo, as did all the other defenders. By the way, the rifle Davy Crockett is swinging there is Old Betsy, and it's probably not a coincidence that Betsy is also the name of Hank's prize guitar.
You know what they say? I'd sell my wife before I'd sell my guitar.
We're then introduced to Jim Bowie, yeah, the knife guy, and Colonel William Travis, who was not a cross-dresser and was a known teetotaler, so he didn't even drink alcohol, but here he's shown to be a drunken, dress-wearing opium addict. And as far as all evidence is concerned, there were no founders of Arlen at the Alamo.
We're all damned. Don't go looking for your opium, Davy. Travis smoked it all up.
I gave half to the prostitutes.
There are also mentions of an escape attempt, which didn't happen, as well as bear baiting, which also did not occur. Now, I'm not going to give a whole explanation of the Alamo. I already have a video over on Squirreled History that does that. But the basics are that from February 23rd until March 6th, 1836, also known as the 13 Days of Glory,
Once they fought to give us freedom, that is all we need to know of the 13 days of glory at the siege of Alamo.
a former Spanish mission known as the Alamo outside of San Antonio de Bejar, was defended by between 185 and 260 volunteers against a force of a few thousand Mexican troops, led by El Chicle himself, Santa Anna. In case you're wondering, he did still have both legs.
I stole your fake leg.
Because he didn't lose one until the Pastry War a few years later. The mission ended up falling after several repulsed attacks, and all the defenders were killed either during the battle or executed afterwards. This event and the massacre at Goliad were meant to break the resolve of the Texians, when in fact it had the opposite effect, with Remember the Alamo and Remember Goliad becoming popular war cries. By the way, this quick history lesson was not brought to you by Cabot Cheese, because they don't pay me to say it, it's just damn good cheese.
Boy, that cheese.
So yeah, all this stuff that Bruce threw in there is total BS and truly outrageous. But that's the point. Outrage gets attention, and attention might get Bruce the break that he's looking for. The issue is that Hank's more, well, we'll say Disney-fied version of history may leave a lot of context out, but way too often the people wanting to include that context also want to include stuff that's provably incorrect, which is when you move into historical negationism territory. A perfect example of this is Cleopatra, more specifically Cleopatra VII, who was Greek. She was the last ruler of the Ptolemaic dynasty, a Greek family put in power by Alexander the Great, who just happened to be big believers in keeping things in the family. family. So not only was Cleopatra Greek, she was very Greek. We know this. It is proven. There is no evidence otherwise, and yet there are some that would argue otherwise. And unfortunately, it's always the craziest ones who yell the loudest and the longest. Anywho, Hank draws the line at Davy Crockett running around with a white flag.
General Santa Anna! General Santa Anna! I surrender!
Which, by the way, wouldn't have done any good because Santa Anna had already flown the flag of no quarter, meaning they were all gonna die whether they surrendered or not. He confronts Bruce about the changes to historical accuracy, and Bruce defends it by saying that Hank can't prove him wrong, which is incorrect. He can absolutely prove him wrong. But again, that's not the point. Getting attention is the point. And to be fair, Hank really should have taken a look at the script beforehand.
That's it. I'm gonna kick your ass. Then I'm gonna reenact kicking your ass.
What were you expecting anyway? The old John Wayne rehashing?
Yes.
By the way, babysitter Charla, who is also the production manager, and the woman Bruce jokes about abandoning his children and running off with, flat out says the quiet part out loud when she admits that they're trying to cause outrage to get attention and show an intentionally different and factually incorrect perspective.
If Bruce is ever going to get his work taken seriously by the people that matter, he needs to show them he's got a new perspective.
Bobby continues his part in the play because he needs the extra credit, while Hank gets together with the guys to figure out what they're gonna do, with Dale incorrectly labeling Bruce as a revisionist, which he's not. We've gone over that.
Damn revisionists. Why can't they ever make history better, where we all live in Antarctica and worship the golden penguin? That would be great.
It's decided amongst the group that sabotage is in order. Since they can't stop the people from watching, they can still wreck the set to stop the show from going on. However, Hank stops to think for a moment and realizes that even though he doesn't agree with what Bruce is doing, it's still his right to do so. Just because you don't agree with someone doesn't mean you should take away their ability to express their views, of course within reason. And yeah, sometimes that could bite you in the rear, but it's the American thing to do, and Hank knows that.
It's not like we're gonna kill people, just ideas.
We can't shut this thing down just because we don't like what they're saying.
Now feel the fun slowing down.
Bruce catches them still holding their weapons and correctly deduces that they plan to use them to destroy the set. But Hank tells them that they changed their minds, and instead, Hank gives a speech to open the show before leaving with the guys. Also, the flag there with the cannon that says "Come and Take It" is a real flag and is in reference to the sparking incident of the Texas Revolution when the Mexican government tried to retake possession of a cannon in Gonzales, and the Texians had an issue with that, leading to the Battle of Gonzales.
Even though they were undertrained, outnumbered, and completely surrounded, they fought on and died for what they believed in. And I've always found that inspiring.
Later on, we see Bobby still failed and has to go to summer school, but it's because he intentionally wrote about the Alamo in his book to make sure that kids learned about it, which Hank is proud of and tells Bobby that he's keeping him out of school the next day so that they can go to Six Flags.
There's Texas, America, Mexico, France. I don't know how France got in there.
And the episode ends with the class that sent out Peggy's flat Stanley receiving her package, which includes pictures of the poor guy being mauled by dogs and chewed up by a wood chipper. Cause, you know, sometimes people just end up in wood chippers. Jeez, Peggy, you even set him on fire in the gutter? Long story short, that's probably the justifiable end of Flat Stanley for that school.
I think this will be the last year we do Flat Stanley.
So, the Alamo episode, it shows a great example of historical negationism, seen as Bruce tries to put on a reenactment that was grossly and deliberately historically inaccurate, with the intention of causing an uproar and gaining himself attention. Don't get me wrong, the old John Wayne Alamo that I probably saw over 100 times before the age of 10 is not the most accurate either, but it's still closer to the truth than Bruce's vision. We get a look at the public school system and their lack of funding. For crying out out loud, new textbooks shouldn't be that big of a deal. But they're also correct in how the content of history being taught is changed to not make people uncomfortable. And as I've said before, you shouldn't be comfortable while reading history. I've been a history buff for most of my life. Hell, I've got a history channel with over 300 videos on it. So I know a little bit about history, and it ain't sunshine and rainbows. Like I said, nobody's hands are clean through the annals of history. Also, the worry about the weight of textbooks is very much a real life issue, or at least it was at the time. The Peggy Lou Ann Flat Stanley B plot isn't one of my favorites, but I do have to acknowledge that it is funny, and it's a perfect example of Peggy Hill's character. Yeah, she's trying to help kids and ends up traumatizing them instead, but that's who Peggy is. She has great intentions, however, as we all know, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Still pretty messed up to recreate Tripp's death though. Overall, I like this episode because it brings light to a few real life issues, such as flaws in the educational system and the danger of historical negationism, though I do wish it had been called out for being such rather than being referred to as revisionist, because those two are not the same thing. True revisionism adds context to the basic history taught, whereas negationism just makes crap up. And ultimately, when it comes to the Alamo, here's what really matters.
These 32 flags honor the birthplaces of the Alamo defenders: Kentucky, Tennessee, Ohio, New York. New York? They were born across America, but they died Texas heroes.
Thanks for watching, folks. We'll see y'all next time.
I know there are a lot of details in history that are up for grabs, like what Jim Bowie was thinking about right before he died, or whether Davy Crockett surrendered, but these are the undisputed facts. In March of 1836, nearly 200 men volunteered so that Texas could become a republic. Even though they were undertrained, outnumbered, and completely surrounded, they fought on and died for what they believed in. And I've always found that inspiring.